welcome everybody. My name is Brandon Amalani, and I'm here with Mr. Paul Harris, and he is the inventor of the Therify and the brand new 2024 Quantaphi 2.0, which we're going to be discussing today. How's it going, Paul? I'm really glad to be here, excited to be here today, because this is a really exciting little product you developed here.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah, it's an exciting day because this is the official launch, I suppose, of the Quantaphi 2.0. We had it down in Dallas, Texas at the Dave Asprey's biotech conference there, and that was sort of our first public introduction. So this is the official worldwide release, and yeah, it's been a long time coming, and it's really good to get it out there.
Absolutely. And speaking of the biohacking conference, we had a bunch of names that were submitted to win a free Quantify. So we're going to be drawing that at the end of this video. So stay tuned for that at the end of the video. You basically gave me one of these to beta test a few months back, and I have one of the old models. And this one is really exciting because of its ease of use. I found it really easy to hook up to my stereo system and use in different rooms, and the interface really couldn't be simpler. So I'm excited to kind of dive into this. So if you're watching this and haven't watched our first two interviews where we cover in depth everything about the Therify, I recommend you check that out because we might kind of go back and forth between the Therify and the Quantify just as a compare and contrast. So if you're not caught up, I would pause this and go watch those first. But if you have watched those, this is going to be really exciting because the Quantify is a device that makes this type of technology, this cold plasma technology, accessible to a lot more people. You don't have to have as much of a room commitment for it and a financial commitment. Obviously, the Therify is kind of a pro level practitioner system that can also be used in your house. But this is something that's really a bit more modular in a lot of ways, but you get a lot of crossover benefits that you would get with the Therify. So maybe if you can start by kind of describing what the Quantify is and who might be interested in using a technology like this.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, that was one of the things that came about with the Therify. A lot of people had them in clinics and places like that, and a lot of people asked, "Oh, can you make a home version? Let's get some kind of home version out." So yeah, it took a while to get the version 1.0 out. And the idea that I had with it was to open it up so you could basically put any frequencies you wanted into it. It wasn't specific like the Therify is. And then you could also have something that's a little more modular, so similar to a bookshelf sound system was the idea that I was thinking with some small bookshelf speakers. And the other difference is you could actually hear the audio tracks that you're playing into it at the same time. So while it's modulating the plasma with Tesla coils, you could also hear the sounds you're putting into it as well. So the original version 1 had an amplifier built on board, and it was a Class D amplifier. It had pretty good sound. There's some really good Class D circuitry out there right now. But, I wasn't quite happy with it because my initial concept was, I want to make it so audiophiles can really dig this unit and really get high resolution audio out of it. And so, yeah, I went back to the drawing board, and version 2.0 is here now. And it has, not only the Bluetooth capability, and you can stream any audio off your phone, or you can put apps on your phone that are specific for various frequencies. There's many of them out there right now that people are experimenting with lots of different frequencies. And the beauty of this one with the hi-fi audio, it has balanced lines out, so you can go into a really hi-fi system. So the cons of it, I guess, is that it doesn't have a built-in amplifier, but that's easily negated by having the speakers that we recommend have an amplifier built into them. So you can just go out of the balance lines into some PreSonus speakers, and they sound really good, and they're affordable, and you have a really good high definition audio with that. Now, if you're a real extreme audiophile and you got a real fancy Macintosh amplifier, 2 amps, Class A circuit, something like that, and you have balanced lines, the beauty of the system now is you can go right out of the back with the balanced lines, and then yeah, so okay, so looking at the back here, we'll just go through that actually if you want to hold that up again, Brandon.
Sure.
So now you've got balance lines out, but you also have a USB interface. So you can plug your computer in there, and it's capable of, let's say you're listening to something on Spotify or whatever, you plug your computer straight in there, and it'll go all the way up to high resolution audio. So you can play DSD files, which is like a direct streaming digital, straight into the USB, and then out through the balance lines. And at the same time, it's going to excite the Tesla coils, um, the same audio signals that you're sending to your sound system too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want you to, before we go into more of the details on the inputs and outputs and everything, um, one thing I think is good to clarify is that you actually, it doesn't require speakers to put kind of the feeling or the energy of the frequencies or the music or whatever you're modulating the plasma with into the electrostatic field. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the speakers are really optional. I mean, it's great if you're playing, some crystal bowls or Tibetan monks chanting or something like that. But especially if you're using frequency generators and frequencies, some of those frequencies you don't really want to hear, for too long of an extended period of time. So you can just basically not run the audio to the speakers by turning down the volume and just modulating the plasma, which in the Quantaphi's case is basically very similar to the Therapy in that it's conditioning the space in the room. It's causing vortices in the ether because in the Tesla coil itself, creates a huge amount of harmonic waves that are moving through the coil. And eventually, as the voltage potential builds up in a Tesla coil, it creates a large electrostatic field around it, which ignites the plasma tubes wirelessly. And we'll jump over and have a look at that in a second. But the idea behind this modulation of plasma is something I've been doing for several years now. When I first came up with the Therapy, the idea was, how do you get the person into the circuit itself? So there was a lot of different Rife machines, like Rife started using plasma back in the early 30s, and that's where he discovered its particular use as a fractal antenna, that he could actually shatter bacteria and viruses by hitting the harmonic resonances with small microorganisms and basically pathogens. And he had a lot of experiments that he did on rats where he actually inoculated the rats with what he believed he isolated these viruses that basically led to cancer. He called BX and BY, and he would grow cancer tumors in rats and then put them in between or underneath the single plasma tube that he had, and basically expose it to the plasma and the RF coming out from his amplifiers, and shrink the tumor. And he could basically take the tumor, cut it right out of the rats, and treat them, and they would live to be a healthy old age. And then what happened back then was the medical industry kind of came to him with, some terminally ill cancer patients, and he managed to have a really good success rate with curing them as well. Then that technology kind of got all swept under the rug and disappeared for many years. And so Therapy is sort of an evolution and Quantaphi of these concepts, but taking it to a whole nother level. And that's the beauty of the two tube system. So basically, you become part of the circuit because anything interacting in between the plasma becomes a part of a capacitor in the circuit, because the dielectric nature of your biological tissue and the surrounding fields around your body interact with the plasma fields that are being emitted um, by the Quantaphi and as well as the Therapy. And the beauty of the Quantaphi opposed to the Therapy is you can also take those modules and add on to them, so you can add more and more tubes onto there. You can put up to 6 tubes at each end, and you can also separate them as far apart as you want. So you can have them in the corners of your room, or you can put one in each room in your house and kind of cover your whole house with the range of it. So that's the other
Wow.
kind of unique thing about the Quantify.
That's impressive. And I think there's also another distinction because people, when you're talking about Rife frequencies, um, you're basically talking about destructive wave interference
Right.
with the body. So you're smashing, you're attacking, like you were saying.
Yeah.
The Therify is fixed and it's constructive, but with this system, you have the option to kind of go either way. But I think it's important to note the distinctions where some people might try and compare Quantify to a Rife machine, but Rife machines were using a shortwave radio carrier signal. They weren't using electrostatic fields, and like you're saying, the body doesn't interact with the field in the same way because as you mentioned, the body being a nonlinear capacitor, essentially, the dielectric or a dielectric medium in the field. These are super important distinctions to make compared to a shortwave radio plasma transmission, which has its effects and uses. But I was wondering if you can go a little bit deeper into the electrostatics and the field itself, because that's a huge part to. I've never seen any technology out there that's a frequency transmission instrument that actually molds all these things two together, also creating phase conjugation and the scalar potential
Yeah.
with the wave collapse. So I was wondering if you can go into that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's what really makes both the Quantify and the Therify really unique. There's no other devices like it on the market, even though people have the same kind of wording and
Yeah.
the same kind of things and say, "Oh, it's just like the Therify." Sorry, folks, it's not. Therify and Quantify are really quite unique in what they're doing in the way that it excites the plasma, and it's part of what's going to be unveiled here in the next few months, part of the disclosure, because it's actually a lot more complicated and a lot more involved in what it's doing and how it does it. And but using these radiative fields, they're interacting with your body on several different levels, from a very fine etheric level, which is what plasma is. It's the fourth state of matter, we call it. I like to call it the first state of matter for reasons we'll talk about at some other point. But basically, because the universe is 99.99% plasma, everything is kind of based on plasma fields and plasmoids, and we have this aura around our body. And it's interacting and structuring the auric field around your body with the electrostatic fields. It's interfacing between the plasma and the tubes and the natural plasma that you have all around your body. Um, like I say, many people have called it the aura or the prana, the chi, that vital life energy force. It's basically utilizing the same principles of nature, and then you're absorbing that field when you're exposed to it. So if you're listening to something like Tibetan monks, and you're really taking it into a deep, deep level from the fields all around your body and into the physical cells in the body, interacting with the body through microcurrents that are moving through the electrostatic field around the body. And it's conditioning the space, as we've always said. And that space conditioning has a lot to do with the plasmoids that are naturally all around your body and in the universe, coming from the sun and all the energy. It's using the same principles of what all life and all matter is created from, basically transmitting through the tubes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're the first person I've ever heard discuss the concept of plasmoids as they relate to electrotherapy machine, which I think is super cool. And if anybody
Yeah.
wants to research that, dive deeper, it's pretty profound in a lot of ways. So I guess most people's question would be like, okay, so what's the real distinctions or differences between the Therify and the Quantify as far as practical application outside of what we just discussed as far as being able to transmit any frequency that or sound that you want?
Yeah, yeah, the Therapy is limited to having the tube sort of on each side of the body in between, whereas the Quantify, you're capable of putting longer cables onto the coils and the tubes, and separating them out quite a bit. And it's a little the frequencies are a little bit different. It's a lot higher frequencies as the main carrier waves. And then the phase conjugation is something you can select. So the nice thing about the Quantaphi is because it's two channels, just like your regular stereo, you can alter the phases in the channels. So if you want to flip one 180 degrees, you get a similar effect to Therify, and you can phase shift them in there. And also with the antennas being portable, you can have the wire tubes aren't connected to any wire, so you can actually just move them apart, and it's kind of like a dipole antenna, so you can stretch those fields into different geometries.
So you
And
can
when you have,
customize it for the room, actually, is what you're saying.
yeah, yeah, you kind of tune to your room, and you can have up to 6 tubes on there, so you can create quite a huge field. And these fields, of course, are toroidal fields. We talked about that a lot with the Therify, and it's the same with the Quantaphi. So when you have a coil, the coil's creating a magnetic field that's going in this way. So it's basically a toroidal field this way, and then you have the tubes coming off at the angles. So you have toroidal fields around the tubes as antennas themselves. So you're basically creating all these different toroidal fields that are interacting with each other, and as you tune the circuit by moving the tubes around, you can really shape the fields around your space. And a lot of people use them in places like yoga studios and for meditation. DJs use them for, you know, putting them out on the dance floor, or putting them at each end of the room. And the other nice thing about it is you can hook up multiple stations. So I think we've had 6 stations with 6 different Tesla coils set up with 6 tubes around each of them in big dance hall, and that's when you really can charge up the space really nicely. So
Now, are
those are
you
some of the
using
things that'll do that the Therify is not capable of doing. Yeah.
right? So when you're saying you're splitting them, are you just running splitters out for all the coils, or you with one brain unit?
Yeah, well, yeah, you need one main brain, and then everything gets split off from there to distribute throughout the room. Yeah,
I'll have to try that one. So
yeah,
when people listening to this, they might think, well, that would really be cool to have in my office and run during the day while I'm working. But we always talk about Therify. You don't want any metal in the environment. And obviously most electronics, like everything I have here is basically metal. Is there any significant field distortion or anything to make note of when you're running it just in your house, as far as like where you want
right.
to place it, what you want to place it next to, et cetera, since the field is so
Yeah,
huge?
yeah. Quantify is a lot more forgiving in that way. You definitely don't want to set one of your stations up next to a refrigerator or a large filing cabinet or something like that. But I've even set them on the bookshelf and even on top of the speakers, bookshelf speakers on top. So having it near other things is not so much of a problem. Of course, the way Tesla coils in general work is there's a big component that is the space itself that it's in. So part of the resonance and the tuning in your frequency, you have to compensate for your room itself. And so any change in the environment will change some of the conditions. But like I say, the Quantify is fairly forgiving in most of the situations like that.
Yeah, awesome. So this is what he's talking about here. The one of the Tesla coils I have in my hand. We're going to show the full setup here in a minute. Um, and I've seen products out there, like you're saying, people use the same terminology. They claim to have like baby Theraphis or mini Theraphis when really it's not the case of like a true air core transformer. One of the things I wanted to hit on before we like go into like the operation of the unit and everything is the um, we have on our site, the yin and yang. So the Therify is very yin. It creates a very yin field. But because this has a dual kind of function, it comes with these kind of antennas, which is kind of the party trick of it. It's really kind of cool. It creates like a counterspatial discharge. But you just put these up, and as the ions split, it'll kind of make these things rotate and light up. Or you have this kind of antenna. Can you go into what the antennas are for? Do they just look cool? I mean, obviously they look cool when people come over, but like what's the reason for providing these or using these when you're running your coils?
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely, look cool, and there's some neat effects, going on there. What's actually happening with, if you put the spike antenna on there, it's allowing the, corona to discharge out of the coil. So when you're running the tubes, it's best to run them without the discharge going. You can combine them both. It's interesting effect. But what happens when the energy breaks out of the Tesla coil when it actually reaches its full threshold to break out into air plasma, which is just ambient air, because the air is primarily nitrogen, you get this nice blue corona coming off of it. And the cool thing about these coils is that corona flame coming off of the top of the antenna is modulating the air. So you just like it's modulating the plasma inside the tubes, you can actually hear the audio coming out of the coils themselves. So it's as it's breaking out of the coil, it's pushing on the air molecules, creating longitudinal sound waves that come to your ears, and you can hear it. So um, that's what the antenna does, and you can combine it with the tubes. But of course, anytime you have a controlled spark, and that's where we're working on right now is how to modulate the air at atmospheric pressures with really, really clean audio sound. And right now they're pretty clean, but there's always a bit of distortion when you do that, due to the variance in the lengths of the arcs
Right.
coming off the top. So that's where I've been playing with for many years to try and get that as quiet as possible. And then the other electrode that you can put on there is the ion rotor, I like to call it. It's kind of like the warp drive ion rotors in this USS Enterprise, basically. And this gets into really cool stuff, like being able to cancel out gravity fields and all kinds of cool things like this. Very similar to the work that T. Townsend Brown was doing back in the 40s and 50s. A lot of really neat effects come from that. And there's a big argument about there is like, well, is it actually shooting off ions that are creating a pressure wave and moving the rotor, or is it actually canceling gravity fields like that? And some really interesting things can happen with that. And that's a big part of the disclosure project that's coming up here soon, too. We're going to talk a lot more about that and a lot about T. Townsend Brown. So basically, when you put these dipoles on there and then they have a point that goes into each direction, it creates a coronal flame that pushes the rotor forward and it spins around. And you can use that for pumping the tubes. So doing, something like what Tom Baird referred to as a pump wave. So you're pressurizing a pump wave into the tube. So not only are you modulating the plasma, but then you have this pump wave that's being modulated at slower speeds depending on the rotation of the ion rotors. But yeah, they're a lot of fun to play with for sure.
Yeah, they're super cool to watch, and I run my system mostly because I'm doing space conditioning. I'm running them without, but there's just something around about being in that field with those running, even just the ozone that's produced. I mean, you see all these old pictures of Tesla sitting, and he's got massive lightning bolts going off, and he always claimed that he thinks it's a lot of the reason he never got sick is because he was in those electrostatic fields, but also the type of oxygen and nitrogen, how it's structuring the air, so to speak, is really a cool component.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it is just like the nitrogen. Interesting things happen at those particular wavelengths of frequencies in the UV range, and so yeah, it binds oxygen together into O3 ozone, but also O4, O5, O6, and longer chains.
yeah,
Uh, in strong doses, you don't really want to breathe in a lot of ozone. It can be harmful, but in
yep,
small, moderate uh, doses, really good. And it's also antiviral. It'll kill any virus. That's the one of the interesting things about plasma is it completely disassociates any kind of biological life form, so it can completely annihilate. And that's why you getting exposed to UV rays and that they say, oh, it can cause damage to your DNA. Well, it does. It'll literally rip it right apart, and
yep,
that's how we use ozone in a lot of cases just for disinfecting and cleaning things. So in environments where you see when you go into a butcher shop or even a bakery and that, and they have UV lights on the wall, those UVs are basically killing bacteria and everything in the local area. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have that advantage, health
and that's
advantage as
something
well.
for people to know too, is that there's not, it's not a huge amount that's being discharged from these things. It's not like an aeronizer or something that puts off a lot of polyatomic oxygen.
Right.
But that's really interesting on the pump wave too, because you have that field, that electrostatic field, and the carrier and the tuning of the coils. But you also have the pump wave, which if it's anything like a PEMF, like a pulsed PEMF, is more biologically active than a static, like laying on a magnet, so to speak. So I imagine that carries over to the plasma science, correct?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely what it does, because things get used to their environment, and so it's part of the reason why, and I guess this will lead down the whole EMF hole, as well, is that, what happens is your body entrains the environment, and it is everything that you experience in your life. It's what makes you, is what you are and where you are, and everything surrounding you, basically. So if you look in the case of bacteria, they look for food and they want to multiply, and then that's what they do. They go about their little day. And then what we found in the early days with single tube Rife systems is we tune into whatever specific pathogen or what bacteria or uh, single-celled organisms we were trying to target, and some of them would die off right away, but some of them had a resistance. And just like any kind of virus or bacteria or anything like that, it gets used to its space as well, and it will build its own defense system around it. And some I've even seen this under a microscope where some bacteria and things that will change their shape, and they'll literally extend out this cellular, it's kind of like a pleomorphic thing that they're doing with their cell wall, and they'll put an arm out just to change the resonant frequency, and they'll be like, "Huh, that's better," and then they'll relax into that. But the idea with the pump wave is you're doing a push like this, and it's also taking the frequencies and it's swinging up and down. So every time you get this dramatic push, then you're covering all the ground. So if these little guys are trying to take themselves out of resonance with your field, the pump wave will take them out when they try to adapt, because it's
Yeah,
always changing. Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome, and that's replicates nature because everything's always changing in nature, especially energy fields. So
Yeah.
cool. So to recap, commonalities between Quantaphi and Therify, they both create the electrostatic field. They both use air core transformers, although tuned differently. And I think the Therify, I ran the math on it. These were what, 10,000 volts per coil. So
Yeah.
the Therify
Yeah.
is like
These ones.
Therify
Yeah.
is like 500,000. So it's about 50 times more powerful with the Therify. However, this still can create a very strong field in the environment, and you can spread them out. So is there any this is one thing I wanted to touch on. Is there any strengthening effect when you move the coils further away? Can you create like a
Yeah.
larger field or what have you?
Yeah. Well, I like to say these devices are like the most powerful subtle energy machines ever made. And it's not all about the power. It's like when you have less, sometimes less is more. Definitely in the case of homeopathics, we've seen that in dilutions of the initial whatever you're trying to put into a solution, and then as you dilute it, it still has these effects, and it'll either have completely opposite effects of what you put in there, or it'll have symbiotic effects that are similar, but in extreme dilutions where you can't even measure the original molecules that you put into those solutions. So this is the thing about the subtle energy and the fields, and it's really, this is all based on the fields that you're creating. So it's hard to measure these kind of fields. I don't think there's any instrumentation. I could put spectrum analyzers and even ion detectors and things like that. Is what I use to measure these fields. But to really get the fields that are being produced by the Quantaphi and the Therify, there is no instrumentation that can really measure that. Just like a scalar field, like nobody has any kind of instrumentation to measure that. But the proof is sort of in the pudding, and when you are exposed to these fields, you feel it, and that's how I go by it. Anybody who's a really good healer or people with sort of psychic abilities or anybody who's really kind of tuned into these subtle energies will tell you right away. It's like, oh wow, I can really feel the field. I sense this and that. And everybody has different stories of how it's kind of how they perceive it and how they feel it. But it's a really unique individual thing. And if you're really sensitive, yeah, you just know and you can feel it right away.
That's
And so
that's
that's
almost
part of the conditioning the space. Like you walk into a yoga studio and you just feel like, you feel that relaxed uh, out breath because these things are based on, like you said earlier, the yin side of the variable. Now, Tesla coils in themselves can be very young, and that's the whole thing when the arcs are breaking out. And that's the other reason why I like to run them without the arcs on there because that's the yang aspect. You can, like you say, you use the lightning bolt's force of the yang energy and just destroy things. Or you can use the yin, the complementary aspects, and that's the soft, subtle plasma and the smooth waveforms that are being emitted by the tubes. Just like in a tube amplifier, when we change from tube circuitry to transistors, everyone went, "Oh yeah, wow, this is great new technology!" And it wasn't long before anybody that was into the real audiophile kind of level went, "Yeah, but it sounds like crap." And then it's the same thing with vinyl. You had records, and of course, vinyl's just this pure, steady sine wave forms that are carved in the groove of the records. But as soon as you went to digital CDs, it was just ones and zeros. So your laser was just blinking on and off, and that has this edge to it. And again, you don't get the fine resolution of the analog thing. So what plasma tubes are essentially doing is taking those signals and producing the most smooth, coherent uh, way of organizing the plasma inside of the tubes. And that field effect is what is you're getting the results from.
right. And I think that's an important thing to note as well, because we've been kind of systematically taught to, basically don't trust your instincts, your feelings, like all these kinds of sensory apparatus that we're, born with. They're innate, but we were kind of have this reductionist scientific mindset saying, well, you can't really trust that if we can't like measure it, it's not there. But everybody that gets in these fields, like you say, walking into a yoga studio or something, you just totally kind of chill, or any walking out into nature in some areas, and some energies in nature aren't the best, like ley lines. There's energetic vortices that aren't really helpful, useful, or healthy in nature as well. But most of them, you feel really great. So I think that's a huge component, because these superluminal energies that create, a lot of people get, what you've talked about before is these longitudinal scalar compressions and refractions that we can demonstrate in the fluorescent tubes. Like if you put it on a Therify, you'll see these compressions and refractions like we talked about before. We can see a demonstrable effect through the gases and how they're moving. However, as they move superluminally to that like scalar potential and creating, this unique effect that you really can't find in other machines. When you can't measure it, you can't measure it, but you can actually, feel it. And I think what's kind of cool about this type of technology, at least from my experience, and this is again totally subjective, but I think it's kind of a training tool. I think the more you're in these fields, the more sensitive you become to dirty or noisy signals, EMFs, all this kind of stuff, not in a debilitating kind of way, just more of a sensory perception and conscious awareness type of way. And I think the more that you interact with these bioactive plasma fields, it's kind of like a training internally, and it develops your consciousness. And you've gone at length about talking about how plasma essentially can be considered consciousness, just like water, which we won't go too in depth here. But I really think that's cool that we can have a system that you can set up, and you can get a huge, like if you have a huge living room or just a big house, you can really kind of condition most of the space in that house, which is
Mhm.
really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and that goes back to the environment and how the body basically tunes into the environment. I always say, it's kind of like when you're listening to music and your head starts bobbing and your foot starts tapping. That's because the brain entrains to the beat, and instantly you pick up on it, and body just wants to, uh, you know, uh, get in tune with whatever it's being exposed to. So in the case of noisy EMF, where you have your Wi-Fi router in your house, and if you ever down tune those frequencies and listen to them in the audio range, it's just like demons with their fingernails on the chalkboard, just like screaming noise. So your body's trying to adapt and get into that chaos, and that throws a lot of systems into your uh, a lot of biological systems right out of balance. And you're an expert on that. You've talked a lot and written a lot about how that has the effect. And the counter effect is with the idea of the quantify is that it's producing those fields in your space so your body can tune to those, because it will naturally go to more coherent. The body doesn't like to be incoherent. That's why it nods its head to the time of the music. It wants to just fall into sync. So when you have more coherent sound and light coming into your space, as well as the magnetic fields, as well as the electrostatic fields, and the interconnection between the plasma and your own plasmoids and your auric field around your body. That's when everything kind of falls into sync.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to kind of
Yeah.
take? We should demo it. We should show
Yeah.
people what
Let's
it
have a
looks like
look.
in action.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just stand on over here. We're in the studio today.
Yeah. So
Oh,
also for people while they're getting set up, these tubes, are these borosilicate? What kind of glasses? Because they're super tough. I've dropped these and
yeah.
I can barely even notice that they're dropped.
Yeah, they are borosilicate. They're really thick. It's important to use this type of glass. It's a special glass. Regular soda glass that glass blowers make into vases and things like that is soda glass, and that is a lot less forgiving. You can heat this glass up to 100 degrees and throw water on it and it won't crack.
Which is
Whereas, sometimes you're putting cold water in a hot glass or vice versa, and you shatter your glass on your table. That's because it doesn't have the thermal capability of the thermal shock from the extreme hot to cold
yeah, and
capabilities as borosilicate.
I don't think people realize how difficult this is. Hand blown. This is you got to
Yeah.
fill this with noble gases in a vacuum, and to make it that durable, that's just I think it's an awesome feat because that's extremely. It takes a massive skill set to be able to fill these type of tubes and actually hand blow them and do all of that.
Yeah, it does. They're made by a special chemistry glass. Friend of mine who's been doing it for years. He's third, fourth generation glass blower, and yeah, it's quite a skill set to do accurate things like that. Because part of the big thing about we're here with the tubes, I guess, is talking about this angle here. This is part of one of the arms, so it's all based on phi ratio, the ratio of 1 to 1.618 up on this here, and that gives us this 72-degree angle that you would find on one of the arms of a pentagram. So on the pentagram, you have the 108 degree angle, and that aligns with the water molecules. So using this phi ratio again in all these systems, the coils incorporate phi ratio, the tubes incorporate phi ratio. Phi ratio is just inherently found everywhere in nature, so it only made sense to utilize that. And this being part of the core of one of the toroidal fields, if you picture the projection coming out where it's at the center of your toroid in towards the top. That's how this energy transmission happens wirelessly, mind you, from the just like Tesla was doing. There is no wires that connect. That's the other unique thing about the Quantaphi, I guess. There's no wires that connect the tube to the coils. So
Yeah, and I was
so
a lot of people don't realize that the glass is a capacitor. There's a cool video, MIT glass capacitor, and I'm kind of wondering. I don't think I've ever asked you this before. It popped into my mind when you mentioned in one of our interviews that the dark plasma, meaning there's plasma in there, it's just not being electrified. Is it seems like there would be benefit for plasma to be in glass just sitting there. I mean, obviously it's more powerful when it's ionized and electrified through the Tesla coil. But is there any like I keep a couple of mine just stored in certain key places, feng shui wise, in my house, just because there is plasma there. I just wondered if you had any comments or
yeah.
on that.
Well, yeah, it's a dielectric constant of glass is really high. So we measure the capability of dielectric to resist the electric breakdown through going through the medium. We call it dielectric constant, and everything has a, depending on what the material is made out of, plastics to everything that kind of doesn't really conduct electricity, has a particular dielectric constant, and the glass is really high and works really well. That's why you'll see glass insulators on telephone poles, on power poles, and ceramic and glass, because it really insulates really well.
Cool. All right,
Okay.
let's go through this. So what do you have connected to it right now? There's a DAC, some cables, some auxiliary cables.
Yeah. So basically, coming out of here right now, oh, we don't have the speakers. So you would take your balance lines out and go to your speakers, and then your power supply is plugged in. Basically, you can use any 5-volt USB C into the power, and that's also where you plug in your computer when you want to run audio straight out of your computer. And then we have a fiber optic connection that uses light pipe to connect the coils. So what's interesting too is we also take advantage of sending signals over this fiber optic cable with the Quantaphi as well. And that does several things, helps protect the circuit. And then we change that modulation. So you might say, oh, well, that's digital. It is, but we switch back to analog once we start transmitting through the coils, and inductive coils themselves have capacitive reactance. So they really smooth out the signal. And once it goes into the plasma tubes, you could say it's pure analog at that point, where it's physically modulating the plasma in time and space,
Mhm.
essentially. So, all
So
right, so I'm going to fire
when,
this up here.
does the Quantify have when you're so if you're just running an optical line with it, which is like the toss cable, and you're going analog, is there so if somebody's not running music or not running any particular frequency, is there a therapeutic or beneficial effect from just the machine being on with the coils, or do you need something to be going into it via Bluetooth?
Um, Yeah, as long as the coils are on, it does, and they're optional as well. I guess you can just listen to the sound like a regular DAC or a regular audio player through your speakers, no problem. But the when you have the coils going, that's creating the space, the conditioning of the space.
Well, so you're creating the space,
That,
which is the basic function, but then modulation implies that you're changing or vibrating the actual field that it's creating in a particular
yeah,
way. So if you're trying to
yeah.
do specific frequencies or using music, what's actually occurring in the field with the music and the longitudinal aspect?
Yeah, well, yeah, what's happening is everything in the field is dancing to whatever you're putting in there. So you're modulating the field, and everything is aligning because of the electromagnetic nature of plasma. Is a very unique property of plasma, is that it will, if you have a magnet in your hand and you put it up to the coil, you'll see it'll move away from the magnetic field. It's like, whoa, I don't want to be influenced by that, because I'm creating my own magnetic field. And this is part of the intelligence of plasma, and the reason why we talk about the consciousness and intelligence being in the plasma is it's creating its own magnetic fields. It's creating its own pathways. So there's a really high resistance. So initially, those noble gases have a very high dielectric before they start to break down. And then, oh yeah, going back to what you're saying about the dark plasma, that's when the dark plasma happens. So even though there's not enough power to basically shoot photons out of it, before that stage, all those molecules still fall into line, and they get in an order where they're prepared to conduct a pathway through the create their own body in their own form and their own shape. Then they're in a dark plasma state, and as that potential gets higher, then they'll go into a fully lit plasma state. And that's how everything in the universe communicates, folks. That's where everything's coming from the sun and feeding the earth. All the planets basically feed on the radiant energy that's coming out of the sun in the form of these plasmoids that are streaming through the air. We see it in the northern lights and the aurora borealis and then the south pole or australis. And it's basically all life forms are interconnected through their plasma fields, and that's how everything's also quantumly entangled in many ways, and that's part of the process of how we get these frequencies into the plasma and then have them resonate with your body is a lot through that entanglement.
Nice. Well, let's and it's also beautiful to look at. So you want to
Yeah.
tone down the
Okay,
lights
so
for people what it looks
we're
like?
gonna fire up here. I'll have to grab my phone and I can start transmitting, but we'll fire up the coils here to get started.
So what you're
And I
seeing
think
over here on the right is
get
the
the light there
Tesla
too.
coil creating the radiant energy, which is
Oh,
wirelessly
sorry.
lighting up this plasma tube.
Yeah.
And right now it's just running at the natural harmonics to what that Tesla coil is tuned to.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's right. I've got the this one connected to the same switch as the light. One second here.
And if you're wanting to be, say you're the high fidelity audio guy, you want the perfect signal, perfect room composition, all of it. You basically you would want ideally to plug each one of these coils into different circuits, right? For like the most clean signal.
Yeah, that's the cleanest way to run them is to isolate the coils from each other. You also do not want to put them too close together. And you definitely don't want to have one plugged in and the other one sitting right beside it because they're a transceiver. It will actually receive the signal from one and it'll light up, but it's not good to run because you're running the circuit backwards. Basically, you're doing a Tesla
Feedback.
wireless transmission.
Right.
But yeah, you can see
Wow.
how the plasma interacts with the field here. So we basically have the capability of putting multiple tubes in these stands and we can change the angles. And this is what I was talking about, how do you tune your antenna to shape the fields that you want to achieve. So you can point them straight on. And you can do the same as the Therify. You can lay down in the field. You can put one at each end of a massage table or something like that. And then you just kind of tune them back and forth like that. And
So what is the
so
minimum distance that you want? Like what's the closest you can put the brain unit to the coils
yeah,
to?
this is about the closest, about 5 feet. Yeah, you want to have them at least 5 feet apart. So where you would normally put your speakers and your sound system for your house. Um, yeah,
And what about the speakers relative to the coils or any of that? Obviously, better quality speakers are gonna
yeah,
better shielded and not you don't have to worry so much about it. But
yeah, exactly. Like I've put them on pretty good quality speakers, bookshelf speakers. I've put them right on top of the speakers with no problems. If you get a little bit of noise in your system, it's a matter of adjusting it around. Like I was saying, the space has a lot to do with uh, how the coils are interacting, and because of the fields that is being produced by the Tesla coils, they will, have some interference and make some noise on things. So you got to play around to get to. You also want to keep your wires all individually nice and neat and separated from. You don't want to lay a sound audio cable next to your power cable because it's going to induce the field noise from the power cable too. So there's a little bit about how you lay out your cables, and like you were saying, uh, having two different circuits to operate on is ideal because that provides some filtering effect too.
sure.
So I'll just Bluetooth into the Quantaphi here on my phone.
And I think some people might have the question like, well, what's with all the wires? Why do you need all the wires? You want to explain the importance of that and why you can't really get clean signal with wireless?
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, we live in this world where we still connect everything through with wires. Tesla's dream is partially coming true, where we can do this wireless sort of transmission like this. Uh, but unfortunately, the most efficient way to get a clean signal is to have, really good cables that are shielded to run from point A to point B. Um, so yeah, that's part of the um, setup. However, with Quantaphi 2.0, it was one of my other uh, cons, I guess, with Verify 1.0 was there was a lot more wires because you were connecting your amplifier was built in here, so you're connecting speakers, and this just makes it a lot more simple with the Verify 2.0.
Yeah, especially connecting it like you are with Bluetooth. I mean, I think that's an awesome integration to be able to just, most people just want to connect wirelessly, and it's super easy in that regard. I find it more easy, and I have the old one, which there was so many inputs. I mean, every input imaginable in the old model, which
Yeah,
is great, but yeah, it becomes kind of complex, and this is simplified in a lot of ways, which I can
yeah.
appreciate.
Yeah, I think I got a bit carried away on the last one. It was like, well, why not have every connection? And I had SD and USB and well, Bluetooth, and there was
Radio, yeah.
yeah, a SD card, and yeah, you could do everything with it. So yeah, basically now we're just gonna play. We just connected on Bluetooth. So when I go to my Bluetooth settings on here, I just select Quantify, and so we're connected to the Quantify now. And I'll go into Spotify and I'll just play something Gregorian chants. Let's put.
So without having speakers to hear the audio component, you're basically just creating the feeling of the chants in the room with the plasma. It's more of like a sensory
Yeah.
feeling versus an auditory response.
Yeah, so we'll start out with that, and so it's playing through there now. And if you look really closely, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but you can see the waveforms in the plasma itself, going with this with the audio.
Yeah, you can see it a bit more in the other one where our perspective is it's a black background, so you can see it kind of
Right.
pulsing
Yeah.
and vibrating a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So now that's playing. Yeah, and then we'll hook up the speakers too, and we'll show you what that sounds like as well.
Cool.
So yeah, maybe we'll pause right there, and I'll grab the speakers and have them set up.
All right.
Okay, so we've hooked up the speakers here now. So, and of course, you don't have to use the balance lines in. You can, and these PreSonus speakers have both balance lines and RCA. So if you have a sound system that doesn't have the fancy balance lines, RCA is no problem. Right now, we're just using the RCAs to go to them. So yeah, I'm going to hit the sound. So as you can see, the plasma's still lit up and still modulating, and it's still creating partial of the field effect, even just being on as it is. And then we'll go back to our Tibetan or the Gregorian chants here. So one of the things that some audiophile people have mentioned to me is that it sounds better in your room when you're playing your hi-fi sound system and modulating the air with the plasma. And this naturally makes sense because now you're being completely submersed in not only light and sound in the electrostatic field and in the plasma transmission that's taking place to you on an auric level on down. So the Quantaphi and the Therify basically interact with your body on all levels. So on an emotional level, we're quite familiar with sound and its capability. Every musician knows there's certain notes that are the happy notes, the sad notes, the minor chords, those kind of things to invoke emotion into the listener. So we're taking it to the whole next level. We're not only utilizing the sound, but all these other aspects of the Quantaphi to really feel the music deeply inside. And that's basically how it works. It really does give you the full immersive effect with the combination of the sound and the plasma.
Takes sound healing to a whole new level.
Yeah. And it is. And it takes light therapy to a whole new level. Because I guess that's the other thing we didn't really talk about was the photonic emission. So what's happening in the plasma is the atoms are being excited and the outer electrons are jumping off. So in the plasma, you have different states. There's ions that are moving. There's electrons that are moving because they become freed, and that's how the plasma creates its own fields and how it protects itself and how it transmits through space. Basically, from every star in the solar system is interconnected through these twisting braids that are dual-stranded twisted braiding things, just like your DNA. Every star is connected to every star through these light tubes. Uh, we call them Birkeland currents after Christian Birkeland, who was a Norwegian scientist who studied the upper atmosphere and the aurora borealis and plasma and how it's what it did. And he said, there's megawatts of power streaming into the earth from the sun 24/7. And when we have a solar flare, like we've had recently with the big sunspots, it can really excite the upper atmosphere of the earth. And we were seeing plasma essentially in the aurora borealis coming all the way down to, I heard of reports in Florida seeing the northern lights and that. So essentially that's how the sun sustains the earth. This is why in, ancient cultures and stuff, they worship the sun. They didn't believe that the sun was a physical dude with a beard and a chair up in the sky, but they understood that the radiation that was being radiated from the sun is what sustains this earth and keeps us going. And basically, it's like that for all life forms in the universe. And plasma being a conscious living entity unto itself, there's massive plasma clouds. So the biggest organisms in the entire universe are made up of plasma. And so they're sort of inorganic life forms with a consciousness of their own. And they consume energy. They feed off of the energy portals and vortices that are our suns and our stars in the solar system, and that's what sustains them.
That's awesome. And I
So
think with people like having experience with the Therapy, where you have the two tubes facing each other, I think a lot of people associate the opposites facing each other as the phase conjugation, which is a little bit of a misnomer. Can you go into like how you would recommend, like you said earlier, like you can direct the tubes and modify it for the room specifically? What are your recommendations as far as, is it just straight subjective feeling, or is there like a strategy that you employ to actually put X amount of tubes and how you directionally shift them?
yeah, yeah, there is, and I like the angles, and I like using the particular angles of like 33 degrees and 90 degrees is a little square, and I don't recommend to put, if you had tubes, you wouldn't want to put them out in four different directions because that creates a field that isn't as receptive. So by changing the angles, like here, we got them facing in towards each other. So in this particular instance, the sweet spot is sort of right here. So this is the counter space between the two tubes at equidistance where we have this charge collapse happening into counter space right here. But we can stretch that. And this is, part of phase conjugation is that when your phase relationships between your opposite poles here, when you can bend those directional antennas out, you can move that counter space around. So as we pull these things apart, we're moving that sweet spot around. So you kind of use that. And If I usually just run 2 tubes on a coil, I usually put them between 15 and 33 degrees, apart like that, and then have them going outwards from the corners of the room. If I had one in opposite corners of each room, kind of projecting in towards the center, or if they're on one wall, you can point the 2, tubes coming outwards to just extend that field out into your general living area.
Wow, so you can basically choose where you want the dielectric uh, wave collapse to happen
The
in the
charge,
room.
yeah, the charge collapsed because, yeah, you're basically steering that around, and that's one of the things we do with phase conjugation is we use it to steer directional antennas and to concentrate force into a particular hot spot, if you will.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. So, I was curious. Do you want to run some frequencies that what we
Yeah,
call destructive frequencies, like what Rife? So you can make it like auditory what people are experiencing with a Rife machine, generally speaking. I mean, some Rife
yeah,
machines,
and
obviously, you can hear the frequency depending on the amplitude. Um, but I thought that would be kind of cool to show people the difference between a destructive and a constructive sort of effect.
yeah, absolutely, and you'll even hear this at home. You'll get a really good feeling for this. Okay, maybe we pause there one second. I don't have the app on this phone. I'll just down. Okay, so yeah, we'll play a little bit with the frequencies here. So I just have this pretty cool dual channel function generator set up on my phone. We're Bluetoothing in here. And this one's really cool because then we can really play with the phase relationships in here. So I'll just play 432 hertz here. And then we have the left channel and the right channel. We can switch back and forth. So when we combine the two together, we can create a beat frequency, for instance, with this. So we'll just take one channel slightly out of tune, and you'll start to hear the beat frequency come in. So now you have that pulse between the two, and it's your brain internally making up the difference between the 432 hertz in one channel and 427 in the other channel. So that difference is the frequency that you're hearing, a beat frequency, we call it inside of your head. So the further out of tune we go, the louder that, or the faster that beat goes. So that's a sine wave. Bring her back up here. Bring them back into sync. There we go. And this is the sound of a sine wave is quite smooth and soothing. And primarily that's the sort of constructive feeling that we get when you hear the sine wave. And this would be a square wave.
Well, we can't. You have the speakers on. I can't seem to hear it on my end.
You hear that?
No, I wonder if it's getting filtered out through the mic.
It probably is, yeah. Yeah, it's probably the anything that's a consistent pattern in the background of Zoom it'll turn it off.
Okay, that makes sense. You
But you
want to
know
try
what we
something
can
like
do? We can overdub them. I'll send you the sounds and you can overdub them over there.
okay. Yeah, or if you want to try something like 10,000 hertz, something screechy, high pitched, we can see if that comes through.
Yeah, let's crank it up.
Thanks, AI, for the demo block.
You hear that?
No, I can't. Maybe it'll come out on the video, but I can't hear it on my end.
Okay, well let's I'll go here. So okay, so now I have one channel up relatively high, about 800 hertz, the other one down at 500. We'll bring them back into sync here. Not sure if you're going to hear this at home. There we go. And so that's a sine wave. Then there's a triangle wave, has a little more ring, a little more harmonics to it, and then the square wave, which is a straight on and off pulse. You get all kinds of crazy phasing.
Hopefully it comes out on your end. Otherwise, we can record these later for people so they can hear what you're demonstrating.
Yeah. So there's a lot you can do with just a function generator, and I'd recommend getting one that you can control with the two channels like that, and just hours and hours of entertainment and experimentation. And you see, if if they didn't turn out too well on video from those sounds, we'll overdub them so you can hear the difference between sine wave, square wave, and a triangle wave. But they each have their own feel to them, and the square wave is more what you're going to get from digital noise, like your Wi-Fi's and that, because it's basically zeros and ones, so it's switching fully on and fully off, so you get this really erratic uh, kind of pulsing thing. So all these different frequencies and everything will give you different emotional feelings, and that's why I suggest to start. If you aren't sensitive to the natures of these kind of devices, start with the sound and start working with the frequencies, and you'll really get a good feel of how they're affecting you internally.
Yeah, and also there's probably references online. I know companies provide them or whatnot, but you can find the classical list of Rife frequencies online. So if you're wanting to use something specific, it does get a little bit complex when you talk about beat and phase shift and using dual channels. So that's obviously simple to learn. Just a couple tutorials, but there's also frequencies you can look up online for specific things if you're running that. But I think most people probably just run things that make them feel good, like crystal bowls or classical music or something coherent like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we'll switch this back over here, and then we'll do the draw. Is there any other questions that you had there, Brandon?
Now, I think you've addressed most of my questions for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this draw because somebody's going to win one of these new quantifies. It's pretty exciting. Get it nice and mixed up. And one rule: if I can't read your name, we go to the next one. Just how it is.
Okay, so drum roll, please. So
Here
yeah,
we go.
thanks everybody for coming out to the biohacking conference. It was great. We had a great booth. We had it set up like this. It was really casual, laid back, relaxed, and a lot of really great people came out. And what was interesting about that show is it was such a high energy, super pumped up show. Everyone tuned in to essentially the vibes of the Therapy, and they're walking around the floor, and people would stand back and look at our booth like, "What's going on here? This is something completely different." And everybody was like, "Well, what's going on in here? What are you guys doing?" And we were just kicked back like this. We're like, "Come on in and try it out." And everybody that really got on the table, I think it's a pretty tuned in crowd. So a lot of people were really responsive and really said, "Wow, that was amazing. I could really feel it." It's
It was a
great.
bit of an oasis for sure because I mean everybody's hyped up on liposomal coffee and just trying every gadget imaginable, and then they come and take like a 3-minute power nap on the Therapy, and then they just come out like in this crazy meditative state. It's pretty awesome as a onlooker to watch and see people have that like visceral reaction like super quick. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got the name drawn. It's Joanne Ortiz. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that correctly. You will receive an email and/or phone call because you left both on here, and we'll be announcing that on Instagram as well. So, congratulations! That's pretty awesome. You get a new free Quantaphi valued at $5,555. We do have the webpage up currently. We'll be launching that officially. At the time of recording, we don't have it out, but it's going to be out in August. So we do have the page up now if you want to sign up for a notification if you're interested in being notified exactly when they come out. We're going to have small batches coming through and being produced. So look for that in August. Paul, thanks, man, for all your time. It's been really great. It's cool to get the tutorial. Is there anything else you wanted to mention or comment on
Yeah,
and Quantify?
yeah, sure. Just these are really exciting times that we're living in right now, and despite a lot of the things that people are watching TV and get a little bit bummed out or whatever, just realize that these are the dramatic shifts and changes that we have to go through as humanity as we are essentially waking up, and it's going to be a little bit rocky here, but there are so many people that are coming out of the woodwork right now, and people like myself that have been working on things in the garage and the laboratory for many years, and it's time now. It's time. So all of this sort of information about health and wellness and energy technologies and all kinds of great stuff are coming down the pipe. We're really putting it together, and so yeah, stay tuned this year for a lot more disclosure on how these devices are working and what the principles are behind them.
Well, thank you for everything you've done, your years of research and experimentation and building these type of devices. It's really impossible for me to not be optimistic about the future if you kind of understand the bigger, larger spiritual perspective, if you will. And yeah, these tools, having these at our disposal is just amazing for keeping ourselves in balance and keeping the right mindset and emotional state for these things that humanity has to go through. So I really appreciate all the work you do, and yeah, it's been really exciting being able to play with this personally. So thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Well, take care.